Changeworking, moving minds for change that lasts.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Changeworking, a show for practitioners and coaches who help their clients create change. My name is Ruckus, and as always, I'll be in conversation with James Tripp. Today, we're talking about the ego, what it is, why it's hard to define, and why trying to get rid of it entirely may not be the freedom people imagine it to be. We explore ego as a collection of stories we tell ourselves, how those stories help us navigate the world, and how they can also quietly trap us when we mistake them for who we are. So here's my conversation with James about the ego, maps of self, and who you think you are. I'm very interested in the ego as a concept. And I don't know if we've never discussed this on the podcast before. And I was looking up and I couldn't find any single definition that everyone agrees on what it even is.
Yeah.
That's why I thought it would be worth discussing.
Yes, it probably is worth discussing. We go, well, what is the ego? And therefore, there's an assumption there is a correct answer.
Right.
And you can do the same thing with hypnosis. You can do the same thing with archetypes. Try and find out what an archetype is, like what a Jungian archetype is. See if you can get that one nailed down.
Right.
Because Jung himself, with archetypes, he seemed to change the way he was using it depending on the context. But really, this is true of so much of language. What is art, right? Find a definition of art that sticks. So one of the things that we have a tendency to do, and I don't think this is a bad thing to do, I think it can be a very generative thing to do, but it serves us to be clear about what we're doing. I call it starting with the word and working to the world. So when people start with the word and work to the world, they go, okay, I want to learn hypnosis. So what is hypnosis? And now they start with the word and they try and work back to the world and they're trying to make the world sort of fit the word. And it's okay because it can be a generative journey. But if we think there's a correct answer, that's not so useful. The opposite of that is starting with the world and working to the word. Right? So you look and you observe phenomena in the world and you go, how am I going to talk about this? How am I going to make sense of this? There's this kind of pattern. Both of these are valuable things to do, I think, in sort of generative thought. I just want to flag that up because we're starting with the word and we're working to the world.
Right.
And the first thing to recognize is everybody's going to use that term differently, but usually not in utterly unrelated ways. Same with the word art. Anyone who uses the word art is probably using it quite idiosyncratically in some ways, but there's a sort of overlap with the way other people might use it. Wittgenstein called this a family resemblance. So the way I use art and the way you use art, we have an individual kind of conceptualization of that, but there'll be a family resemblance. If there's enough of a family resemblance between the way we use those words, we can probably communicate most of the time reasonably well and usefully, but it may also mean that some misunderstandings get pulled in and we don't understand why. Anyway, as a meta perspective before we talk about ego, when you said the word ego, the first thing that came to me was the voice of Eckhart Tolle on his audiobook version of A New Earth, saying, the ego loves nothing more than to make others wrong. And I love that quote, and I think it's really, really true. Now, it also implies that the ego is a sort of entity with agency and wants to do things. I don't know how much truth there is in that, but it can be a useful model. I will say what I mean by the ego when I talk about the ego.
Okay.
What I tend to mean is all the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves to make sense of ourselves in the world. Right? So I'll repeat that. The stories we tell ourselves about ourselves to make sense of ourselves in the world. Now, as I say that, somebody might go, well, how can a collection of stories have desires, wants, agencies, these sorts of things? Is it an anthropomorphization to go, the ego loves nothing more than to make others wrong? I don't know is the answer to that. It's very possible that collections of ideas can have like an emergent intelligence that goes with them. In Western esotericism, there's an idea called the Egregore. Do you know this idea? So an egregore is essentially a thought form that takes on a life of its own. Basically, in a sense, it's like a meme in some ways, an original meme before the internet got hold of the idea.
Right.
Right. Or a cultural idea, something that's been thought into being, but sort of exists anyway. Now it's been thought into being, as long as it keeps getting fed with enough attention, enough thought. Right. It literally is a living thing. If you know Neil Gaiman's American Gods, basically that idea, I think, is informed by the idea of the egregore. So all of the gods in American Gods exist because human beings brought them into existence through their belief, through their thoughts. But it's not that they are just ideas. They actually come to life as a result. And they need to be continually fed by ongoing attention and worship. So this is a sort of egregore. And I think that we have a lot of egregores in our minds, parts of ourselves. Are they really like these autonomous parts, or are they just these thought forms that have got a life because they keep being metaphorically worshipped, i.e., kept alive by our energy, by our attention, by our utilization of the structures and all of this kind of thing. So I think that you've got this sort of collection of ideas about yourself, and they are there. They serve a function to make sense of yourself and the world. So a lot of people are going, well, you want to transcend your ego, like there's some sort of enlightenment to be had from escaping the ego or killing the ego or vanquishing the ego. Going back to Eckhart Tolle, he tells an interesting story about when he had his sort of awakening, that after he didn't really do anything except sit on a park bench for 2 years, if I remember rightly. He did nothing. And I think that's a really interesting thing. It ties in with something that Antonio Damasio, the neuroscientist, neurosurgeon as well, in his conceptualization of our self, he has 3 selves, which he calls the core self, the autobiographical self, which I think we can stand in for the ego, and the proto-self. So the proto-self is like our basic organic self, and in the information that comes from our basic organic self, and somewhere in the unconscious realms of our mind, that is aggregated into a kind of self. So that's our proto-self. Then we've got our core self, and our core self is an almost content-free sense of existing, I am, and of being able to act upon the world. So I sometimes just call this the I am and the I can. So this is your core self. Now, without ego, you can sit there and go, I'm here, I exist, and I can act. But there's nothing more in the mix. The autobiographical self in Damasio's topography is this collection of narrative material about who we are. As soon as we say, well, I'm the kind of person who, or, I've always hated, or I've never been able to, or I'm pretty good at that, or whatever. Any kind of I am statement is a story about self. It's an idea about self. So this is the ego. Now, it's very interesting because Damasio is a neurosurgeon. He's seen a lot of people with very interesting brain lesions. And he's interested in the bits of the brain that make up the various networks that do these sort of 3 selves. And one of the things that he noticed is people who have damage to key regions of the brain that are part of the systems that from which, say, the core self emerges, if that's knocked out, that person's gone. They're just gone. They're no good for anything. I mean, they might still be functioning. They might still be alive, but there's nothing. There's just nothing there. That's if the core self is gone. If the core self is intact, but parts of the brain are damaged that take the autobiographical self, which we could call the ego, offline, those people are sort of semi-functional. And what tends to happen is with those people, if they're hungry and you give them a sandwich, they'll eat the sandwich. If they play piano and you sit them down in front of a piano, there's a fair chance they might play. There's all sorts of things that they will do if presented with that thing to do, if they have the expertise and skills to do it in their past before they had the brain injury. But they are completely incapable of looking after themselves. They cannot make decisions. Not only can they not make decisions, they do not even try to make decisions about the course of their lives what they should or shouldn't do, what's next, anything like that. They're just completely in the moment and reacting to whatever gets presented to them. That's kind of interesting when you go back to the Eckhart Tolle story about he stopped doing anything. He just kind of sat there. So I think it's kind of interesting, people that are striving to be egoless. Be careful what you wish for. Because the ego, again, this is why I talk about it as the stories about ourselves to make sense of ourselves in the world. We need to make sense of ourselves in the world because we have decisions about what we're going to do. Are we going to do this? Are we going to do that? Where do I want to spend my time? Those sort of longer term plans, these sorts of things, they are very much dependent upon this ego. Right? Now, I also think it's important to recognize, I sometimes call the ego the map of self that we carry, as opposed to the map of the world. Now, it's not really as opposed to the map of the world. It's part of our map of the world. But we have a map of how everything works in the world, what's important, what's not important, what is so, what isn't so, what should be, what shouldn't be. We all carry this map of the world, and then we carry this map of ourself. And we're comparing the two all the time. There's a saying, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right.
Right.
Now, the Nathaniel Branden version is self-concept is destiny. And I think self-concept can stand in for ego as well, right? So why is self-concept destiny? Because it's how your map of self matches with the map of the world, right? So if I go for a job interview, if I go, do you know what? This job was made for me. I have everything I need. I can handle this job. I'm probably going to be pretty grounded in it. I'm probably going to go in there fairly sure of myself and all of this, because my map of the world and my map of self go together in that instance. But if I think that the nature of this job is something that I'm going to be out of my depth in, right? I think I'm not the kind of person that could do that. I can't handle those sorts of situations. I'm going to hang back. I won't even probably go for the interview. Maybe a part of me will go, no, you have to go past your limitations. Go push yourself. But I'm going to be filled with insecurities and fear as a result of it. Now, social fear is almost like is 100% egoic fear. And I think if we go into this idea of story of self and map of self, it's important for us, in order to feel good about ourselves, to have a map of ourselves as a competent, capable human being. Otherwise, we do not tend to feel good about ourselves. So if our map of self says, I'm no good, I'm full of limitations, I'm whatever, yeah, we can repress a lot of that. And sometimes when people maybe have narcissistic tendencies, what is diagnosed as narcissistic personality disorder, that's an overcompensation. It's an attempt to bury profound senses of inadequacy within the ego with a self-aggrandizement, which is accompanied by a constant need for validation, and sort of the narcissistic personality does not take it well when it does not get the validation that it needs. Now, the reason for this is because we can't tell the difference. We mistake the map for the territory all the time. So we can't really tell the difference between our map of ourself and ourself. Anything that threatens my idea about myself, I will generally process as a threat to myself. So if I was out there as a hunter-gatherer and I was hungry and someone said, there's a lot of fruit in that cave, I'd go, ooh, I'm going to go and get some, but a bear lives in that cave. I'd be like, yeah, a bear could tear me apart, right? Literally, it could drag its claws through my flesh and tear me apart. Now, in another situation, many tens of thousands of years later, I'm about to stand up and give a presentation to a room full of people. There are no claws, no real claws that are going to rip through my flesh.
Right.
But people may laugh at me. People may think that I'm stupid. Some people may walk out because they think that my presentation is too boring, etc., etc., etc. None of that actually harms me physically, right? But the fear I might feel could be equivalent or greater than the fear that I'd feel going into the cave with the bear in. Now, the bear is a real physical threat. It's a threat to my life. The egoic threat, it's still treated like an existential threat. Unconsciously, we react to it like that's going to hurt me or that's going to harm me. And so the ego, like it can get in the way of people. Yes, it informs us. It's a map. It's useful. It helps us go, right, what do I want to do? What do I love? What do I care about? It helps us navigate the world, right? If you're going to be a captain of a ship, you have to be able to navigate the waters that you're in, but you also have to understand how your ship works. You have to have a good idea of where everything is in your ship, or you can't run the ship. So we need that. But on the flip side of it, if our ego is not organized in a useful way, or we don't see the nature of it, because there's two things you can do. You could have a healthy ego. And a healthy ego is a pretty good map of self, and maybe an ego that sees the ego as being an ego, not as being who you are, right? So often people go, I want to transcend my ego. I'm like, maybe. Maybe you just want an ego that understands its own nature or has a map of its own nature. And then you can be a lot freer. So a lot of the time when it comes to most fears, social fears, they are egoically driven. So one of the ways to deal with that is not to upgrade somebody so that the content of their ego is now, I used to think that I perhaps wasn't a very worthwhile human being, but now I know that I'm a completely, now I know I'm better than everyone else. So I don't have to worry anymore about being rejected. That's really not a good solution.
Right.
Right. So trying to change the content of the ego. So if somebody thinks they're stupid, for example, that's part of their ego, and they bury that, right? That becomes shadow then. That they fear that might be true, but they have to run compensatory strategies. Maybe they'll run a narcissistic compensatory strategy and go, well, I'm a genius and all of this. While deep down, they still fear they're stupid. The aim isn't to really believe that you're hyper intelligent. The aim in the transcension of the ego is to recognize that's just an idea. That's not really who I am. It's just an idea. It's more or less useful. In fact, a lot of the time it's less useful. And to be able to kind of relate to that ego and that self in a variety of different ways. So as when things that may be processed as an existential threat to you come along, they're no longer a threat because you see them differently. You have them mapped differently. So there's a change in ego there, and we take ourselves less seriously. So there's a line I really love, which is Korzybski, whatever you say it is, you're wrong. Because whatever we talk about, I talk about this phone. This phone is not made of or constructed from any of the ideas that I can have about this phone. The phone's here, the ideas are all here. So my ideas cannot be the phone, but I act as if my ideas about the phone are the phone all the time. We do the same with ourselves, right? I've got a bunch of ideas about the phone. I got a bunch of ideas about myself. But we make the mistake of thinking we are the ideas we have about ourselves. That really is who we are. So this idea of whatever you say it is, you're wrong. That's true about me. Whatever I say I am, I'm wrong. It's just a thought about me. So like there are kind of conversational hypnosis lines where you can deliver these to people. What is everything that is true about you that goes beyond all that you thought you were? Right? And like that's a gambit that will land sometimes. People, they go, oh, other people go, what are you talking about? And on they'll go. But there's a whole dimension to change work, which is what I call the black path side of change work, which is just all about this. It's all about changing a relationship to your ideas about the world, your ideas about yourself. It's developing these kind of meta layers that mean that the stuff that used to be down in amongst it all or down in it, used to take it really seriously and be really reactive to it. You can now be up above it and go, oh yeah, those are some curious ideas. Look at that. Oh, and when you get to that point, sometimes you can watch your ego reacting. Go, oh, look, isn't it curious what the ego wants to do here, or what that idea of me wants to do here, or something like that. But you get this kind of meta position. It's really useful to be able to develop that meta position. I call this being up above it or down in it. Sometimes it's great to be down in it. You don't want to be dissolving the trance in the moment that the ego and the understandings of what's happening are creating. Sometimes they're absolutely fine. All is well and nothing needs to be changed. Sometimes one might get caught up in feeling offended or upset or insulted or in one truth about why a person is doing this thing to you. Why would they do that to me? Are they really doing it to you, or are they just doing it? So we organize reality and we create pain through our ideas about things. And one of the ways that we can alleviate that pain or free ourselves from that pain is to transcend, by default, taking those ideas too seriously or so seriously. We see them for what they are, ideas about ourselves, not the truth. And that is true of ideas we hold about the world, events, but also ideas we hold about ourselves. Anyway, there's the ego for you.
So we did a whole episode about identity, and I don't think we once used the word ego in that episode. And it's got me wondering, is there a meaningful difference between ego and identity? How do you think about those two as individual ideas?
Again, they're ideas. So every idea is an invention, and it has a kind of flavor. The way people talk about identity is an odd word. It used to mean, your identity would be, I'm James, I'm 52 years old, and I live at this address. Be the stuff that you get on your ID card.
Right.
And it would just be there so that, if we live in a civilized world, the authorities could validate who you are. There's that level of identity. You show your ID card, it doesn't tell you deep truths about your soul or anything like that. I don't tend to sort of talk about identity that much. I tend to probably refer to autobiographical self more by default, or ego sometimes. But there's a little bit of a danger with ego because some people who are, say, Freudian have got a very specific idea about ego, which might be slightly different from people who are Jungians. Freud's idea of ego, I'm not a Freudian by any means, and I generally don't like most of the smell of Freud's stuff. But as I understand it, and I could be wrong here, the id, ego, and superego is kind of a useful distinction. And the id is all of your unconscious stuff, right? And the way Freud looks at that unconscious stuff, it's all just dark, animalistic impulses and things like that. Jung's idea of the unconscious is completely different. It's much more intelligent, creative, and wholesome, I think, than Freud's. So Freud's id, his unconscious, is all like these forces, these animal forces and things. And then you've got the superego, which is a really interesting idea, and I think quite a valuable idea. The superego is the internalization of all of the rules of society. Right? So it's the kind of realm of the shoulds. It's how people should be, how people should behave. So we internalize that. That's the superego. And then the ego sort of sits somewhere between the id and the superego. It's the us that is sort of partly adapted to the world and sits there. This is my understanding. Someone else is like super Freudian might go, James, you got the wrong end of the stick with that. So it's this kind of self that sits in between. And I think there's maybe something to that. So I think Freud's ego is more about how we present in a way that is socially acceptable and how we mediate that. So it's more than just the ideas of self, I think, as this is my understanding. But I think there's definitely something to that because as we build this map of self, we're constantly referencing what we think is acceptable, what we should be good at, what we shouldn't be good at, what we should like, what we shouldn't like. There's all of that sort of thing going on. And that's where, like, if we go to a more Jungian perspective, that's where the shadow stuff comes from, where we start going, oh, I'm like this. I like these things. And everyone says that's a bad thing to like, right? Or I think I'm like this. And everyone says that's wrong to be like this. So, now there's a lot of sort of guilt and shame that can come out. What was the question you asked?
Is there a meaningful difference between identity and ego?
I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
I don't especially think so. Again, these are just words.
Yeah.
You know, so like the question is, who are you talking to in any given moment?
Right.
Like if I'm talking to a client and they bring up the topic of ego, they bring that word up, I might use that word, right? But I'm not going to just throw the word ego at a client.
Right.
Because ego has got, there's a cultural idea of ego. Most people, when they go, well, this person's got a big ego.
Right.
it's not usually a positive term. So if I say, well, your ego is, and they go, you're saying I've got an ego? I don't think I have an ego. I don't want to use that word just randomly and throw that at a client, for example. I just want to say something about working with clients. I work with different sorts of clients in different contexts. So some clients that I work with, I'm having generative conversations with that are about engaging in creating new sense together with the client. They are sense-making conversations. They are a generative conversation. They are usually with people who are quite adept at making use of new ideas, right? If you work with someone who's very adept at making use of new ideas, you can get change happening so easily. If you're working with somebody who believes that how I see it is how it is and all I see is all there is, then you're going to get into an arguing about what is or isn't so, a kind of frame. And you can't work that way anymore. You can't just work in a very easy, fluid, exploratory, conversational way. You usually have to do something, a bit of trickery, maybe some process work to get around that. So if I'm in a conversation with somebody and they've brought in the idea of ego and they have a particular way of understanding it, then I might utilize that. I might use the term ego. But if, on the other hand, I'm talking to somebody, now we're doing this kind of ideas-based work, and they're like, well, I don't know. And I say, well, that's probably got something to do with the ideas that you're holding about yourself outside of consciousness. And they'll go, well, what do you mean? And I'm more likely to use the frame autobiographical self at that point. Because there's no cultural baggage on it.
Right.
It's a neutral term for them. They've never really heard it before. So I get to define it any way that's useful. But if they've come in and they've got a useful idea about the ego that we can use, good. We'll go ahead and use that.
I know you said you don't think about identity, but for some reason it's something that comes up for me a lot because I've struggled with who am I anymore for a couple of years now. Like I'm a screenwriter. There was a very long time where that was all I did for my job. And then I had a dry spell. My wife and we didn't have a screenwriting job for a long time. And then money started getting tight. And I'm like, well, I can't go get this other job because I'm a screenwriter.
Right.
And that literally created all kinds of problems in our life. And was that a challenge at identity level? Maybe it doesn't matter to define it, but
I think it probably doesn't matter hugely whether it's identity. I mean, identity may be, if we're going to draw a distinction, which is invented right now in this moment.
Right.
Maybe it's a little bit more, dried out because it's not so valence, not so evaluative. I think the ego often has got a charge on it around, I'm a screenwriter. That might be an identity piece. I'm a good screenwriter. Now maybe we're like a little bit more in the realm of ego. If we draw this distinction, right? Like I think ego is very much concerned with our value.
Right.
Right. There's a big dimension to it. Now, again, it's how you use the term. So we could go like identity plus evaluation and values-based stuff equals ego. We could go in that direction. I think something like that, I'm a screenwriter. It is an example of, how we can get ourselves trapped by identity or ego or the stories we tell about ourselves about who we are and how we are, whether they empower us or not.
Right.
I love the line from Brad Blanton, I think the guy's name is, which is yesterday's liberating insight is today's jailhouse of stale thinking. So yesterday's liberating identity could be today's jailhouse of stuckness or whatever.
Right.
Somebody like Richard Bandler's kind of interesting like this. And we may have talked about this when we did the identity episode, but I'll mention it again here because it's relevant. Bandler, I noted years ago, he'd be there going, I'm a musician, I'm a mathematician, I'm a hypnotist, I'm a scientist, and he had so many I ams. Right? You listen to him speak, he's got all these I ams, he'll toggle from one I am to another. Right. And again, this could be a meta level thing because we might have identity, but then there's our beliefs about identities. Some people go, well, I'm one thing and one thing only. If I'm this, I can't be that. Somebody else would go, I could be anything I like. I can be many things. So I can be a screenwriter. and I can be a musician. I can be all of these things. And I think I'll tell you something that occurred for me a few years ago on the identity level. Maybe I told the story before. Is I had this identity piece, and I'd explicitly put it in as a sort of self-hypnosis or self-generative practice of I am a magician. And that meant something particular to me, not like I'm a close-up magician that manipulates cards, although I have done that in the past. More about that's a way of showing up in the world and creating non-linearly and working with the unknown interdependencies and surfing the wave and all of this cool stuff. And for a long time, I had this belief I am a magician and I could reorganize my reality. As I reorganized my reality from the inside out, difference would unfold. And it was largely true, by the way. This was largely true. It did seem to work this way. What it also meant is, as a result, because of the way I did magic, it was all based off this be, do, have. So it was about putting myself into certain states and grounds of being that fitted my template for generativity. But what in practice that meant is I made myself high all the time through, you could call it auto-suggestion, self-hypnosis, whatever. I basically made myself high on cool things are going to happen. I can do anything I want. And I sort of recognized afterwards that it was very similar. The high that I put myself in was very similar to a friend of mine who I went to school with, I was in a band with when I was young. He got a bipolar diagnosis when he was in his 20s. And before that, it was like nobody knew what would happen. He'd have these phases of mania. So bipolar used to be called manic depression. And these mania phases, he would think that he could conquer the world, and he would believe that they were delusional things. But he loved it, right? He now manages this without medication. He said one of the hardest things about this is when the high starts to come, it's so tempting to go with it because it feels so good. But he knows he's going to pay the price.
Right.
So he has to keep himself from that high. Now, that's his sort of default state, the manic depression. I learned to do the mania, right? Not from him, but separately from doing internal work. This is the thing about change work, what I call personal alchemy stuff, where you're working with yourself. There's all sorts of things you can do, and they can seem really great. But in NLP, they talk about ecology. What's the ecology of it? What are the broader ramifications? You don't necessarily know at first. So there's a little kind of pseudo-esoteric text from the late 1900s called the Kybalion, which is allegedly on Hermetic philosophy, but it's an invention of that era more than a true reaching back into history, I think. But it's got a principle in there, the principle of, I can't remember what they call it, oscillation. It might just be no, it's not vibration, it's oscillation, right? Everything swings, the pendulum swings back. So if you think high, low, the pendulum swings back. But in the Kybalion, it sort of suggests that if you really learn to master yourself, you can rise above the swing of the pendulum. I thought that's what I was doing. I wasn't. I was forcing the pendulum further and further and further in one direction and not allowing it to swing back whilst believing I was above the swing of the pendulum. So I lived for a while in this reality. I'm a magician. I do this stuff. I bend reality. And it was great. It really was awesome in so many ways until it wasn't, because I fried my circuits, because I wasn't letting the pendulum swing back. I wasn't resting. I wasn't having any downtime. And I went for months and months and months and months without a single day off. I took every booking. I was speaking everywhere. I was flying all over the world doing workshops, just go, 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 go. And instead of resting, I just put myself back in a high. Anyway, at some point, my body or my unconscious mind said, you're going to stop now. I'm going to stop you. And things started to go wrong. And what did I do? Put myself back in the high. But it got harder and harder and harder. And then it was like things were just really falling apart. And Lexi had to step in and cancel off a load of commitments I had that I was refusing to step away from. I basically burned out. People call it burnout. And I thought that I would be all right with, say, a week's rest or something. I've never been the same since. And that was probably 5 years ago now, maybe 5 or 6 years ago now. I've never really been the same since. But anyway, here's the thing. The reason this ties in with identity is because I had so much pinned on this reality that I was a magician. And here I was, a husk, burned out, like not really able to do anything. And I thought, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm not a magician? That magician piece of identity, that was, I built that. I do not by default, my upbringing or whatever it was, didn't leave me. It didn't bequeath me a robust ego. It bequeathed me like a lot of insecurities and lousy self-image and all of that sort of stuff. So I built this self-image and I just was like, oh my God, what does it mean? Does it mean that none of that was true and I'm just this loser again or whatever? But I thought to myself, well, look, I'm a guitarist as well, of sorts. I'm not claiming to be the greatest, but I can play and I play guitar. Does it mean that I'm no longer a guitarist because I haven't played the guitar for a while?
Right.
Or am I just a guitarist who hasn't played for a while? And I thought, does it mean that to be a magician, does that mean that all you do all day, every day is magic? Right? Does it mean you stop being a magician when you're not doing magic, when you're eating your supper? You're not a magician anymore. You're just an eater now. So I thought to myself, and this is a choice. This is a choice to organize reality in a certain way. No, I'm still a magician, right? I'm just not doing magic at the moment. I can do it. I'm cautious about it. I'm like wary of it now, because it all seemed like only upsides and no downsides. But rarely in life is there something that has only upsides and no downsides.
Right.
So I found a way of retaining that identity, but under different conditions, because that identity was useful for me. So like, I think you can be a screenwriter who hasn't written anything for a bit, or a guitarist who hasn't played for a bit, or a magician who hasn't done magic for a while, or like Bandler, you can be many things.
I think in the similar vein is the term self, and earlier you mentioned some versions of that, but I kind of Googled here the term self with a capital S, and I found, and they probably all have different definitions, but Carl Jung, Abraham Maslow, psychosynthesis, IFS, and a bunch of non-dual teachings like the Bhagavad Gita all use the term self with a capital S. And but I didn't sit there and try to individually get a definition from each of them. But I'm curious, like, do you differentiate self from identity from ego? Like, are those three different things?
Not really. I mean, to me, there's a really interesting sort of thing here. There's an idea in Taoism that the songwriter Donovan borrowed for the song, "First there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is."
Is that the title of the song?
That's the only lyrics throughout the entire song.
Oh, I've never heard this. Maybe I'll look it up now.
And I can't remember what the quote is from. I don't know if it's in the Tao Te Ching or a different Taoist text. But it's this kind of idea of the third mountain. Now, Bruce Lee alluded to this. He said something like, I wish I had the exact quote, when I started out doing martial arts, I thought that a punch was just a punch and a kick was just a kick. But then as I learned more, I started to realize that a punch is a manifestation of your intention within the dynamics of the energy of the moment, and da-da-da-da-da. And a kick was, and then now I realize that a punch is just a punch and a kick is just a kick. But it's not the same as the first mountain. The third mountain is not the same as the first mountain. So Bruce Lee's "a punch is just a punch" number 3 is not the same as "a punch is just a punch" number 1, first position. It's different. Right now, how do you make sense of this? Well, the Tao Te Ching opens up with the Tao that can be named is not the true Tao or is not the eternal Tao. It's got this idea that our understanding of things, the sense we make, is not the things we're trying to make sense of. Many traditions touch on this. There's the Zen expression, if you see the finger pointing at the glory of the moon, focus not too much on the finger because you'll miss the glory of the moon.
Right.
So self is a finger pointing at the glory of the moon. The word self, whether it's with a capital S or whatever,
Right.
any word, any signifier that we use, any concept that we use is a way of pointing to something, right? So I said this idea of starting with the word and working to the world. Well, if you start with the world, you try to look beyond the ideas. Now, that's easier said than done, and it may even be impossible in certain ways, but the right hemisphere tends to do it. The right hemisphere tends to apprehend without words. The left hemisphere wants to conceptualize everything and then mistake that conceptualization for reality, right? So the reason this is significant is because there's a movement in philosophy, particularly kind of continental philosophy rather than Western analytic philosophy. And I think it's really entered the world these days. And it's part of what's contributed to what people call the post-truth era. There's no truth. There's only stories, right? It's only so we can make anything up any way that we like. I think Terence McKenna, who I love, said once, the world is made from words. And when you discover the words that the world is made of, you can make it up pretty much any way you like. I disagree, right? You can make up your experience, you can make up your relationship, but it doesn't mean there isn't a reality out there beyond the words we use. But again, to quote, I think it was Heisenberg, I've been told it's not Heisenberg, you know what it is with these quotes.
Right.
Reality is not only more complex than you think, it's more complex than you can think.
Right.
So when we use a word like self, capital S, whatever, we're pointing to a reality that is there, it is real, but it's more complex than we can really think or get nailed down. So we can do our best, but we can just only really sort of point to the glory of the moon.
Right.
Now, this is really important because you can get caught in this sort of constructivism, so to speak. Well, we've just got our ideas about the world. None of our ideas are about the world itself. The map is not the territory, as Korzybski put it. A lot of people go, well, the map is not the territory, so I can basically change the map any way I like. Yeah, but it doesn't make it a functional map.
Right. Right.
Right. So I think this idea that just because we cannot speak truth in an absolute sense, right? And some people don't get this. They don't get, they'll challenge this. And this is a philosophical point. Can you speak truth? Well, if I say Paris is the capital of France, people go, well, you just spoke truth. That is true. That is a verifiably true statement. Well, hang on, but what is everything that's excluded by that? What does capital mean? What is the nature of a capital? Who decides whether it's the capital? When was it decided? Is it recognized by everybody as the capital? Is it the capital of France if you're a bat? Right? So, there's all sorts of variables. There's all sorts of information that gets left out in any statement that you make. So maybe there is some truth in that statement because we decide it, but it's not the totality of all the truth. So you get this problem with definitions across the board. So this kind of self thing, is it there, is it not there? It's a bit like God, right? Now we're getting deep. Maybe. If you say pick 1,000 people who have some conception of God and say, what is God? You can get 1,000 different answers.
Right.
Now, for some people, that will literally be a dude with a white beard sat on a cloud, making things happen.
Right.
Right. You go, but is it really a dude on a cloud? Is it actually a dude? Is it male? Is God male? Or like someone else will go, no, God is just like the ineffable force within the universe that whatever. And you go, well, are you talking about the same thing? When you're talking about the white-haired old man on the clouds and you're talking about the ineffable force that organizes the universe and somebody else, are we talking about the same thing? Well, again, there might be a family resemblance. There may be things that are held in common. So somebody says to me, James, do you believe in God? Well, not the white-haired old man sat on the cloud. No, I don't. Right? Do I use the word God? Not often, extraordinarily rarely, not a word I use much. But somebody else might say to me, James, you that thing you were talking about, that's God. Right? I go, okay, that's fine. So I think there are deeper truths all the time, and we human beings clumsily reach for them. Some of us clumsily reach for them. Others just go, yeah, I think I know how it is. Yeah, no, it is like that. It's not like that. That's right. That's wrong. And other people go, well, what is actually going on here? Like you do. So you're doing inquiry into self. What does that mean? In IFS, there's this idea of self. Is it literally true? I don't know. Is there truth in it? I think yes.
Right.
Right? I think that's a really useful distinction. Is it true versus is there truth in it?
There's a term, I think it's William James, is radical pragmatism. I don't know if we've talked about this before.
Right.
But that idea of what works is what's true, and it doesn't really matter, if everyone agrees with that or not. I know this works, therefore, at least my relative truth is this is real.
Yeah.
Because it works. Right.
And that's something that's been absorbed probably from William James into NLP. Although there's the Vaihanger stuff as well, the philosophy of as if, which is, well, I just like to act as if and see what results I get. That's another form of radical pragmatism. And for me, for a long time, I was a strict radical pragmatist for the longest time. So basically, I didn't believe anything. Well, on an intellectual level, I didn't believe anything was true. Of course, if somebody was throwing a rock at my head, I'd have moved my head, believing it would hurt me. But, I used to be like a radical pragmatist and go, well, all ideas, there's nothing to them. They're all basically equal. They're just symbols. They point to things. And this is a feature as well of a lot of sort of deconstructionist philosophies or constructivist philosophies. But what that does is it sort of places no value on deeper truth. This is the third mountain, by the way. So to me, the third mountain acknowledges that there is a deeper truth, and we might as well call it a mountain.
Right.
But, it's more than that. It's deeper than that, right? A mountain isn't quite it. So I think this is kind of important, and it's why like in NLP they talk about reframes, and this is because, well, we just changed the frame. Does it work better? Does it work worse? Right? It's a radical pragmatism again. I'm like, yeah, but like, does it feel true? What is the quality of it? Because, and I've talked about this before, you could say, is it useful? That's radical pragmatism. Like the motto of radical pragmatism is it useful? But what is everything else that could stand instead of useful? Is it beautiful? Is it enriching? Is it heroic? Right? You could literally put anything in there and have a different criteria for evaluation. Right? So it doesn't have to be, is it useful versus is it true? Is it true there could be many alternatives. So I happen to think, like, is it beautiful? Is it enriching? Is it enlivening? All of these things are useful adjuncts to that radical pragmatism. And of course, and this is why I say when doing hypnotic change work, aesthetics count. Now, aesthetics, I think, relate back to pragmatics. So if you forget aesthetics, you can go, well, aesthetics says it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. Pragmatics say, no, it's what you do. So if you just know it's what you do, you don't recognize that the way that you do it makes a difference as well. So like, if you just stay in this dried out utilitarian frame, is it useful? I think that takes a lot of richness, a lot of deeper dimensions, a lot of richer experience out of life. That was my experience of living as a radical pragmatist for a long time. Now I'm no longer consider myself to be a radical pragmatist. Sometimes I think things that have no apparent purpose are wonderful things because they are rich in and of themselves for all manner of reasons that we may or may not be able to talk usefully about.
I guess my takeaway why I found the concept of radical pragmatism inspiring is just that it allowed me to let go of trying to decide whether it was real or not or true or not.
Yeah.
And just say, oh, but it works. It doesn't really matter.
Right. Right.
That was basically what I took away.
Well, that is a hugely valuable function. And again, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying my years as a radical pragmatist were wasted and I was wrong.
Right.
They were what they were, and they were valuable. Because if somebody is caught up in a lot of pain and suffering, something that enables them to transcend that pain and suffering is of incredible value. Now, it may be that it doesn't connect them to something else still that's of greater value. And it may be that I couldn't jump from being caught up, what I call truth trapped. So, I use this term, the truth trap. When somebody's truth trapped, they're caught up in what I see is all there is and how I see it is how it is. And they're caught up in, is it true, is it not true? And they will argue about what is or isn't so incessantly if you attempt to offer them a different way of seeing. Right? This is being truth trapped. This is why it's incredibly liberating for a lot of people to get to there is no absolute truth. Right? Now, people are no good at doing negatives. So if you go, there's no absolute truth, they go, they've got to have something else to choose.
Right.
So what do you choose instead? You have to have a stand-in. Is it useful?
Yes.
Right. Now you can choose. I've often said a real choice is not this. It's not this. If you haven't got something else to grab,
right,
nobody will let go of a branch when hanging in a tree unless they've got hold of another branch first. That's the way we work. So if you say to people, there's no truth. All truth is illusion, like in Hinduism, the idea of Maya, the veil of perception or deception, or maybe both. I'm not into the Hindu stuff, so I don't really know. But, just that letting go. But what do you hold on to instead? In 3 Principles, which has been a big influence on me, one side of it is letting go of the excess importance of your thoughts and ideas, right? But the other side is what you take hold of instead, which is a trust in greater mind, universal mind, the self-correcting mechanism of life. Right? You have to be able to take hold of something else. And this is a critique of my friend Jürgen Rasmussen, who is genuinely brilliant, has one of the most brilliant minds in Changework, but he's got this psychological illusions model. A lot of it's inspired hugely by 3 Principles, a lot of it by non-dual stuff and some modern Zen teachers. But the whole point of the psychological illusions model is you come to see the illusory nature of thought, i.e. you let go of the thoughts. What Jürgen, I think, doesn't offer is something to take hold of instead. Now, I'm not saying that means that he can't work that way, but I think that what you take hold of instead is always more important than what you're letting go of. Or maybe not. I mean, if you can let go of the branch, you may go on a great adventure that may, it may not mean crashing to your death. Maybe you float away into the atmosphere. Who knows? But it's easier if you've got a solid branch to grab. So I think with radical pragmatism, you've got something to grab. It's like, is it useful?
So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. I'd love the idea that maybe it's more about having a healthy relationship with the ego rather than trying to transcend it. And perhaps real freedom isn't changing the stories about ourselves, but seeing them as stories in the first place. If you've got thoughts, questions, or ideas for future topics, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at changeworkingpod@gmail.com. See you next time.
Changeworking is produced by Ruckus Sky. For information on training, go to clientshifts.com.